France in 1789 was a nation on the brink, glittering on the surface but cracking underneath. The palaces sparkled, the aristocrats danced, and France's influence stretched worldwide. But for most of its 27 million people, life was a daily struggle, dictated by birth and class. The system was rigid. Your family line decided if you feasted or starved. The kingdom creaked under contradictions, peasants taxed into poverty, bakers jailed for empty shelves. These weren't minor grievances, they were deep flaws in the nation's fabric. The pressure built, with no release in sight. So how does a centuries-old system finally break? It's never just one thing, it's a perfect storm of economic hardship, new ideas, and political failure. The gravitational pull of the old ways was about to be shattered by the explosive force of revolution. This is the story of the French Revolution. To truly grasp the coming explosion that would shake France to its core, you first need to understand the Ancien Régime, what people called the Old Order. This was not just a government, but a way of life, a social structure that had shaped France for centuries. It was a world of strict hierarchy, tradition, and privilege, where your birth determined your destiny. French society was divided into three rigid estates, or social classes, each with its own rights, duties, and privileges. These estates were more than just categories, they were worlds apart, rarely mixing, and each jealously guarding its own interests. The first estate was the clergy. Though they made up less than 1% of the population, they owned a staggering 10% of all the land in France. They paid almost no taxes, yet collected tithes, a kind of tax from the poor, enriching the church while ordinary people struggled to survive. The clergy wielded immense influence, not just spiritually but politically and economically as well. The second estate was the nobility, about 2% of the population. They owned over a quarter of the land, held the highest offices in government, the military, and the church, and were also exempt from most taxes. Their power was protected by law and custom, and their status seemed unassailable. Their lives were defined by luxury and excess, grand balls, lavish feasts, and sprawling estates. Their privileges were untouchable, and they lived as if the world existed for their pleasure. The third estate was everyone else, an astonishing 97% of the population. This group included everyone from wealthy merchants and skilled artisans in the cities to poor peasants and laborers in the countryside. They produced nearly all the nation's wealth, growing the food, making the goods, and paying the bills. Yet, despite their numbers and their labor, they had almost no political power or influence. Their voices were ignored by those above them. The third estate shouldered the burden of all the taxes, paying to the king, the church, and their local lords. Every harvest, every sale, every bit of income was taxed, leaving many families barely able to survive. The third estate was the engine that kept France running, but they were left out in the cold, carrying the weight of the privileged classes on their backs. For most, social mobility was nearly impossible. No matter how hard you worked, your birth determined your fate. The doors to power and privilege were firmly closed. Life for the majority was a daily struggle. The system was a cosmic lottery, and for almost everyone the odds were stacked against them. Poverty, hunger, and hopelessness were common, while the elite lived in unimaginable comfort. The estates were like separate worlds, orbiting around a king who tried to hold them together, sometimes with force, sometimes with tradition, but always with tension simmering beneath the surface. This was the structure about to collapse, a society built on inequality, teetering on the edge of revolution. By the late 1780s, France's finances were a disaster. Decades of war and royal extravagance had created a mountain of debt. France had spent a fortune helping the American Revolution, while denying its own people the same rights. Versailles was a symbol of excess, with lavish feasts and endless spending. But the real problem was the tax system. The rich paid almost nothing, while the poor paid everything. As debt grew, the government squeezed the third estate even harder. Taxes on essentials like salt and bread soared. For peasants, a new tax could mean starvation. The privileged estates refused to pay their share. The system was not just unfair, it was unsustainable. The imbalance was a ticking time bomb. Collapse was inevitable. While France struggled, a revolution of ideas swept Europe, the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau challenged the old order. They argued for natural rights, government by consent, and separation of powers. Rousseau's "Man is born free and everywhere he is in chains" became a rallying cry. These ideas spread through pamphlets and coffeehouses, giving people a new language for their suffering. Injustice was no longer fate, it was a system that could be changed. The Enlightenment gave the Third Estate hope and a vision for a new world. Liberty, equality, and fraternity became more than words, they became a cause. The intellectual groundwork for revolution was set. In a crisis, leadership matters. King Louis XVI was well-meaning but indecisive, lacking the strength to confront France's problems. He appointed reform-minded ministers who proposed taxing the privileged estates. The nobility and clergy blocked every attempt, clinging to their privileges. Louis backed down, dismissed his ministers, and avoided confrontation. His weakness created a leadership vacuum. The monarchy's inability to act convinced the Third Estate that the system was rigged. Faith in the crown evaporated. The king, once a symbol of power, now seemed powerless. The privileged felt secure, the people felt abandoned. The monarchy was losing its grip. The center could not hold. By the late 1780s, crisis hit home. Poor harvests led to grain shortages. Bread prices soared. For many, bread was life. Now it was a luxury. Workers spent nearly all their wages on food with nothing left for rent or clothing. Starvation and bread riots swept the country. The suffering made injustice impossible to ignore. Nobles feasted while children starved. The church hoarded grain. Marie Antoinette became a symbol of royal indifference. Pamphlets and cartoons spread anger, turning economic pain into moral outrage. The people saw the system itself as the enemy. Salvation would not come from above. Change would have to come from the people. In the spring of 1789, France was teetering on the edge of collapse. The royal treasury was empty, the people were hungry, and unrest simmered in the streets. In a desperate attempt to address the mounting crisis, King Louis XVI summoned the Estates General, a gathering of representatives from all three social classes, or estates, of France. This was a momentous event. The Estates General had not been called for 175 years, and its assembly was seen as a last-ditch effort to solve the kingdom's financial and social turmoil. Hopes were high, but so were tensions. Delegates from the First Estate, the clergy, the Second Estate, the nobility, and the Third Estate, everyone else, arrived at the Grand Palace of Versailles, each group carrying the weight of their constituents' expectations. The Third Estate, representing a staggering 97% of the French population, came armed with long lists of grievances, cahiers de doléances, detailing the injustices and hardships faced by ordinary people. They demanded change, fairness, and a voice in their own government, but the system was stacked against them. Each estate had just one vote, regardless of its size. This meant that the privileged First and Second Estates could always outvote the Third, preserving their own power and privilege. Frustrated and determined, the Third Estate demanded a new system, voting by head, where each delegate would have a vote. This would finally give the majority a real say in the nation's future. But the king and the privileged estates refused to budge. They clung to the old ways, unwilling to share power or acknowledge the growing demands for reform. Tensions reached a breaking point when the Third Estate found themselves locked out of their meeting hall, an unmistakable sign that they were being shut out of the process. Undeterred, they marched to a nearby indoor tennis court, determined to continue their work. There, in that unlikely setting, they made history. The delegates raised their hands and swore a solemn oath. They would not disband until France had a new constitution, one that guaranteed rights and representation for all. This bold act, the tennis court oath, was a direct and open challenge to royal authority. It was a moment of unity, defiance, and hope. The Third Estate now declared itself the National Assembly, claiming to represent the true will of the French people. For the first time, the voice of the majority was being heard. The old rules and traditions were shattered. The delegates had broken free from centuries of oppression and set a new course for the nation. The revolution now had a new center of gravity. The energy and determination of the National Assembly inspired people across France to believe that real change was possible. For King Louis XVI, this was a moment of crisis. His authority was being openly challenged, not just in words, but in bold, collective action. The balance of power was shifting. The people of France were no longer passive subjects. They were awakening as citizens, ready to claim their rights and shape their own destiny. The tennis court oath marked the first decisive step toward a new France, a nation built on liberty, equality, and the power of its people. The tennis court oath shook France, but tension kept rising. The king moved troops into Paris and dismissed his popular finance minister. Parisians feared a crackdown. Panic spread. On July 14, 1789, thousands stormed the Invalides for weapons, then marched to the Bastille for gunpowder. The Bastille, a fortress prison, symbolized royal tyranny. The crowd demanded its surrender. The governor refused. Violence erupted. Shots fired. Chaos reigned. Mutinous soldiers joined the people. Cannons battered the walls. By evening, the Bastille fell. The people freed prisoners and tore the fortress down. The fall of the Bastille was more than a victory. It was a revolution unleashed. The people realized their power. The old order was crumbling. The storming of the Bastille was the point of no return. On July 14, 1789, ordinary Parisians rose up, their anger and hope igniting a spark that would set all of France ablaze. The Bastille, once a symbol of royal tyranny, fell to the people, marking the beginning of a revolution that would shake the very foundations of society. The king lost control. The National Assembly's power was undeniable. For the first time, the voice of the people echoed through the halls of power, challenging centuries of absolute monarchy and privilege. The ancien regime shattered, replaced by a new order. The old ways, nobility, clergy, and monarchy, crumbled as revolutionary fervor swept the nation, leaving behind ruins and the promise of something new. The revolution was a chain reaction. Centuries of injustice, economic crisis, bold new ideas from Enlightenment thinkers, and the indecision of a weak king all converged. The people, hungry for bread and for rights, demanded change. The National Assembly abolished feudalism, ending centuries-old privileges and freeing peasants from oppressive dues. It was a dramatic break from the past, a declaration that all men were equal before the law. They issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man, proclaiming liberty and equality as universal rights, and seized church lands to fund the new government, further weakening the old order. The revolution spiraled through radical phases. King and queen executed. The reign of terror unleashed fear and suspicion as revolutionaries turned on each other in the name of justice. Amidst the chaos, the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte brought new hope and new challenges. He promised order and glory, but also carried the revolution's ideals across Europe through war and conquest. France was transformed, the old hierarchies erased. The shockwaves spread worldwide. Liberty, equality, and the dream of a fairer society inspired people far beyond France's borders. Fraternity became a global rallying cry. The tricolor flag and the motto, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, became symbols of hope for oppressed peoples everywhere. The revolution proved that people could overthrow a monarchy and shape their destiny. It showed that ordinary citizens, united in purpose, could change the course of history. It challenged absolute rule and inspired democratic movements everywhere. From Europe to the Americas, the call for rights and representation echoed, fueling revolutions and reforms. The French Revolution was messy and brutal, marked by violence and upheaval, but it changed the world. Its lessons, both inspiring and cautionary, still resonate today. Its legacy endures, a turning point in the human quest for justice and equality. The revolution's ideals continue to inspire those who seek freedom, dignity, and a better future for all.